Let me tell you how important a smile is. I was doing a program for a bank in Indiana. I had 30 people in the room. Remember I said you borrow from one industry and use it in another industry. I had 30 people in the room. And I said, and I'll say the same thing to you, you will remember you were in this session. You will remember you were in this session tomorrow morning because of what I'm going to say right now. Because I'm going to ask you to do something tomorrow morning. And I challenged them at this bank to do the same thing. I said, tomorrow morning when you get up, I said, what I want you to do, first thing, when you look in the mirror, and you see that creature looking back at you, sleep in the eyes, hair all messed up, wrinkles on the face from the pillow. I said, look at that creature in the mirror and give that creature a great, big, beautiful smile. I said, because if you can smile at that creature in the morning, you can smile at anybody during the day. I said, so for the next 30 days, I want you to go home and I want you to practice this and then come back and we'll report on it. So about a week later, they all came back and I said, okay, did anybody do that? And one of the young ladies in the room raised her hand. She said, yes, Joe, I did it. She said, I got up, I looked in the mirror and she said, there's no way I could smile. She said, I had to laugh. I said, that was great. That's even better, right? Then another woman, she raised her hand. She said, Joe, I was having a morale problem in my office. The employees, we had a morale problem with my associates. She said, I got up that morning, I looked in the mirror, smiled at myself. It wasn't easy, but I did it. She said, then I went downstairs, and I smiled at my kids and my husband, and they thought something was wrong. And then I got in my car, and I started smiling at people on the way to work. And by the time I got to work, I said, I'm going to try this at the office today. And she said, I smiled at each employee and really meant it. She said, by the end of the day, she said, the whole attitude of my department had changed. Wow. And then sitting in the back of the room, a young woman named Cindy raised her hand. She said, Joe. I said, yes, Cindy, what is it? She said, I've got to share something. I said, well, please stand up and share it. She said, you were here 4 weeks ago. And 2 weeks after you left, my father passed away. So, Cindy, I'm sorry. She said, well, he had been in a coma for 2 weeks. And she said, I was standing there with him. And she said, I had my hand on his hand, and he turned to me, and for some reason, I don't know what it was, he opened his eyes and he looked at me. She said, I don't know if you'll ever be in this position. I hope you never are, because she said, there I am looking at my father. He's looking at me for what might be the last time in his life. What do you say to your father if you know it's going to be the last words? She said, I didn't have any words, Joe. She said, I had no words to share with my father. She said, but I looked down at him, and I remembered what you said. You said, a smile is a gift that we can give away, and it doesn't cost anything. She said, so I looked down at my father, and she said, I gave him the biggest, the most beautiful smile I could ever imagine. And he looked back up at me, and he smiled. And he closed his eyes, and he died. She said, thank you. I said, thank me for what? She said, for giving me the only gift that I could give my father before he died. And my point was, gee, I didn't even know what I was telling people. If she felt that a smile was such a gift to give to her father as the last gift, why can't we give it to everybody every day who comes into our place of business to give us their money? Why can't we give it to our associates, the people who come in every day to give us their sweat to work for us and with us? A smile. It's a valuable tool. Use it.